A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Well, turning our focus again today on the sorts of books we like to read and the fact that there are Christian authors who write Christian novels for a broader audience, but as you might expect, with a different set of ethics, a different set of values that colour their writing. Author David Lenehan is launching a number of books this year, recognising there's an appetite for his style of writing. His life's included a very diverse career, serving in the military, teaching, working in business, spending time travelling, and he's joining us to talk about his books, but as a Christian writer. David, a special welcome along to 2020.
Thank you, Neil, and hello to everybody who's listening.
David, a passion for fiction writing, and you've been a Christian for a long, long time. In fact, I've known you for a long, long time, and you're now writing novels, but not necessarily for a Christian market. What's your passion here for writing fiction?
Well, it's very interesting. The passion comes from really from a lot of life. I was initially challenged by a very sceptical wife to write things because I was not very happy with the quality of what she was reading in terms of Christian novels. And, Dick Francis, the famous British author, once said, write about things you know about. So I did. And over the years, I have, as you pointed out, there's been a fairly colourful life there. And, I've seen tragedy and joy, death and birth. I've seen war and peace, and not just in a marriage. I've had a lot of laughs, and I've cried quite a few tears over the years. But C.S. Lewis's statement that Christianity isn't freedom from difficulties, but peace during difficulties really, really rings true with me. And so as a result, with the memory that God's given me, I'm able to take a lot of those life experiences and actually put them into fiction. Sometimes that fiction is Christian fiction, sometimes it's not. But building the Judeo-Christian values that I hold very, very dearly is the basis of all of my writing.
Now, you write under a nom de plume, another way of saying you've got a pseudonym in there. In other words, the name on the book isn't necessarily the name of the author. That's a pretty common thing, I think, for people who write fiction. What's the idea behind a nom de plume? And you've chosen the name David Loxton. Is that because it's got some sort of romantic adventure feel about it? Or, how did you choose a name like that?
Well, interestingly, David Loxton, when I did a search, I was searching for a name that was similar enough to mine, so that if I'm interviewed as David Loxton, somebody says to me, "Hey, David, I'm going to answer." If it was Paul, I might not answer. So the name was picked on that basis, but I then went and searched to make sure that David Loxton wasn't a contemporary fiction writer. And as it turns out, there is a David Loxton, but he wrote non-fiction things, and it was quite a few years ago, died in the 1980s somewhere. So I'm not going to get mixed up with him. And that was the basis. And the reason that I chose to write under a nom de plume is very simple, that I wanted to separate my professional life as a teacher from my life as a fiction writer.
And the sorts of things you teach. Now, if my memory serves me correct, you've got some degrees in mathematics and things like that, and you like to talk architecture and all sorts of... There's a very broad way of being involved in business and community and teaching life. Give us a little bit of a background on some of the things that you might have been involved in over those years.
Okay. Well, I've been involved in Christian radio, quite a lot of it actually, as you're well aware. Yeah. And that was actually how you and I initially met. And but there's been a whole range of things. You forgot the big one when it came to the degrees. I have a PhD in applied linguistics. And that is what I teach most of all these days. I'm really teaching languages. I'm teaching communications, the way languages work, develop, the way they're taught. And these days, more often than not, when I'm teaching, and it's nearly all overseas, it's more about teaching postgraduate students and teaching teachers on better techniques to reach their students.
Let's talk about linguistics for a moment, because while I haven't read your current book in its entirety, I think it's about 400 pages, I was quite surprised at your grip on Italian language. The book is called Escape to Italy, and there's an awful lot of Italian expressions in there. Is this one of your favourite languages?
It's a language I'm currently learning. I'm not fluent in Italian at all. I'm fluent in a couple of other languages, but not Italian. And Italian has a lot of similarities to English. There are many words that you would recognise. They're very similar. So, but it's expressed completely differently, and it's a very colourful language, Italian. I love it. I actually enjoy living in Italy. I enjoy having spent a lot of time there, and as a result, having a fairly intimate knowledge of Florence, Florence becomes a major focus of the book Escape to Italy.
So you've got your book, it's called Escape to Italy, and you've got a little twist in there, because some people might say this ought to be an escape from Italy, but people who've been to Italy no doubt know why you might like to escape to it.
Well, escape to Italy is a bit of an oxymoron, Neil, because you escape from things, as you pointed out. You don't escape to things. To may become a factor, but the reality of it is, in the linguistics world, you escape from things. You don't tend to escape to things. But Escape to Italy is a story of a man who's looking forward to an early retirement, because in his mind he's largely finished with life. But then 3 increasingly negative events create an environment in which he discovers that life hasn't finished with him. It's not a Christian novel, but neither is it an anti-Christian novel. And there's a couple of points that where the Judeo-Christian values that I espouse to come through. One of them is, one of the pivot points of the book is where he suddenly realises that meaning in day-to-day life comes through responsibility and not through pleasure, and certainly unreserved pleasure. Later in the book, he's telling a gathering of university students who are graduating that success, the commonly accepted measures of success in the world, things like wealth, a big house, a beautiful spouse, the Ferrari and so on, are not actual measures of success. They may be indicators that there has been success, but they're not success in themselves. He points out things like, if your spouse looks at you the same way 20 years down the track as he or she did on your wedding day, then that's success. That's just one, and if anybody wants to find out what the rest are, they're going to have to buy the book.
Okay, so this one's not necessarily a Christian novel. Of course, there are dimensions, because you bring your own personality, your own values into the writing that you do. But you've got a couple of Christian novels now in the pipeline, which are much more focused on a Christian foundation. Let's just chat about those for a moment. One of them is Paradise Beyond the Horizon, another one called Clearing Obstacles, but the Paradise Beyond the Horizon due for release in around about a month from now.
Yes, something like that. It's due at the end of March. Paradise is an adventure novel set in World War II, where a young Australian buys a trading schooner in the Solomon Islands with his inheritance after he becomes an orphan. And World War II overtakes him. Interestingly, he's tasked with a rather interesting mission to take the missing governor, he and his wife are missing, presumed dead, and he's tasked with the mission of taking the 3 daughters of these people to Australia in safety. And as they start the journey, they realise that he may actually know where the governor and his wife are, and that they may actually be safe. So they set out to go and find them. they do. And then it really becomes rather interesting because, well, I mean, let's face it, he's just a colonial, and worse, he's an Australian colonial, and they're aristocratic, and they stare down their noses at him, and it gets worse after he falls in love with one of their daughters, and it's reciprocated. Sets up an intriguing book which goes right through past the end of World War II.
Let's talk just briefly around the Christian view of the world and the way Christians tend to think of writing for Christians, because sometimes we think that Christian writing is some way a super sanitized type of novel. But the application of the Christian worldview into life really has a real life edge to it. Is this something that you're aiming to bring into your novels? You want Christian views and values, but you want to actually have the real life enterprise, the story, the adventure.
Absolutely. I mean, some of the books I've written were written some time ago, and I tried to get them published, and I kept getting told by literary agents that you won't get it published because you're dealing with real-life issues. And I found that, it was one of my complaints about the books my wife was giving me, was that, they were sanitized to the point where basically what you got was boy meets girl, they fall in love, then they're separated by circumstances often beyond their control. Then years later, they reconnect and live happily ever after. Amen. Somehow we're expected to believe in that scenario that the worst that these people will ever endure in their entire lives is the 3-day-long trauma of the initial separation, and that somehow it's all miraculously healed at reunification. It's just so unrealistic. There's no questions of things like, which job do I take? How do I know who to marry? Where do I live? Do I change cars now or do I do it later? Questions can be as mundane as do I cover my head in church if I'm female because somebody said I have to? Or it can be, much more important, like how do I introduce my friend to Jesus? Without alienating them and destroying the friendship. So those sorts of day-to-day issues that Christians face, I think, are really, really important. And as authors, I believe we have a responsibility to provide thought-provoking scenarios that get people to use their own brain. God gave us a brain for a reason, and I believe as authors that it's our job to provoke that brain into thinking.
Well, there's endless fodder to write about and to apply your Christian worldview to, and not always around sanitised subjects. Hey, the books, just let me name those. Escape to Italy, that's the one that people can get a hold of now, and
yes.
Paradise Beyond the Horizon coming out at the end of March, Clearing Obstacles, another one, and I know you've got another half dozen or more just sitting ready for release sometime very soon, and let's just talk about those ones for now. So Escape to Italy for listeners. Now, we mentioned you are writing under a nom de plume, David Loxton, Loxton. So for listeners to remember that David Loxton, there is a Facebook page under that name, and that's got a universal book link on it that takes you to the links where you can actually get a hold of the book. It's an ebook for now. That's the best way to connect with you?
Absolutely, it is at the moment. That is, and people are most welcome to, ask for friendship, Facebook friendship. Quite happy to interact with people through that anytime that they choose to do so. And they're also welcome to disagree with my worldview. I don't mind.
You're happy to have an engaging conversation. So look for the Facebook page, David Loxton. It's actually David Lenehan, and there's a universal book link there. David, thanks so much for sharing your insights with us today on 2020.
My pleasure, Neil. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.